come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off, because today I'm going to share 29 fantasy role-playing games which you may consider checking out if you're looking to leave Dungeons & Dragons behind. But first, welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. You may have caught my video last night where I pontificated on the Open Game License 1.1 for Dungeons & Dragons from Wizards of the Coast and discussed how unfriendly this new Open Game License will be to some major role-playing game publishers out there, as well as smaller third-party content creators and possibly video creators and podcasters and so on and so forth. We're not positive that that's going to be the final Open Game License, but it's possible it is. So that information has left a lot of people out there confused, upset, pissed off, and for good reason. And during the video last night, I had mentioned I could easily come up with 20 fantasy role-playing games right off the top of my head, which you could go pick up, bring to your game table, and just enjoy the hell out of. And they aren't Dungeons & Dragons. But I didn't tell you those 20 role-playing games. Well, you got to keep in mind, it was completely unscripted, just like this video, completely off the cuff, just like this video. And you may have noticed that it was all one take, because I don't, say a sentence or two and then cut, say another sentence or two and cut. I don't do that because, for one, I can string two or more coherent sentences together at one time. Usually. So anyway, I had mentioned, I could think of 20 easy. Just like that. Well, people commented in the comments section for that video asking, where's that list, Jeff? How about you share those 20 role-playing games with us? Well, that's what I'm going to do with this video. But a few things I do want to mention before I jump on in. And first of all, I don't have experience with each and every one of these role-playing games. Many of them I do. Many of them have been reviewed on the Gaming Gang, either written reviews or video reviews, either from myself or one of my correspondents. Speaking of correspondence, though, I'm always on the lookout for new tabletop role-playing game reviewers, because I have publishers approach me all the time asking me to review their PDFs. But I don't personally review PDFs because nowadays I only shoot video reviews. And to be honest, a video featuring only a PDF I personally find to be kind of boring, and actually especially boring to shoot. But there are some fantastic role-playing games that are out there, and adventures and supplements that are currently only available in PDF. So if you can string together two or more coherent sentences in writing, and you love tabletop role-playing games, please shoot me an email at jeffmcaleer@thegaminggang.com. You can swing on over to thegaminggang.com and also click on Contact Us to get my email address. Because as I mentioned, I am always looking for tabletop role-playing game reviewers. And one of the benefits of being a reviewer for the Gaming Gang is you actually get copies of everything that's being reviewed in PDF, not just the games that you're doing a review of. So it's one of the nice things that we're able to provide to our role-playing game reviewers. All right, so there is that. I also don't have experience with as I mentioned, with every one of these role-playing games, but I am going to share what I know about them if I've never actually delved into them or reviewed them. And I'm going to talk about what their main selling points are, and they come very highly recommended from people whose opinions I highly respect. So it's not as if I just went onto Wikipedia and was like, fantasy role-playing games. Yeah, okay. Last thing I do want to mention, a lot of these I've reviewed. A lot of these have been reviewed at least on thegaminggang.com, maybe not by me personally. But neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has ever received any other sort of compensation outside of a review copy to provide coverage to you. And these days, it's actually important that you know that. So first of all, I'm going to talk about role-playing games that I do not actually have a personal physical copy of. First off, we've got 13th Age from Pelgrane Press. And this is actually one of Pelgrane Press's most popular role-playing games. I have always heard very, very good things about 13th Age. My understanding is it is exceptionally well suited towards more of a storytelling sort of role-playing, as opposed to looking at something that's got really crunchy mechanics and very tactical combat. I've heard that the character creation is pretty easy to get through, and that you can create some very, very unique characters. These aren't cookie-cutter role-playing game characters. There's also quite a lot of content out there for 13th Age, for some people who don't homebrew adventures, is very important. So it's 13th Age from Pelgrane Press. Should also mention, to my knowledge, each of these role-playing games I'm going to talk about are also available in PDF. So you don't necessarily need to run out to a game store or go to Amazon or go to one of your favorite online retailers and purchase a physical book. You can check them out for a much lower entry cost than going out and buying a physical book. Next up, this is a pretty new role-playing game that I'm hearing very, very good things about. And it is Avatar Legends, the role-playing game from Magpie Games. Truth be told, I have actually never reviewed a Magpie game. I have always heard good things about them, and I've shared news pieces about their various different role-playing game releases. I know they do a lot of role-playing games that are powered by the apocalypse, if you are familiar with that. And I will talk a little bit more about powered by the apocalypse when we talk about an upcoming role-playing game. Another reason why I haven't really looked into this too hard as far as like trying to review it, I have absolutely no experience with Avatar: The Last Airbender or any of those series. I have nothing against them at all. In fact, the animation looks really good. I've just never had an opportunity to dip my toes into Avatar, and there's so many episodes out there that it's one of those kind of animes that I'm kind of deterred from checking out because I'm like, oh, wow, look at all those episodes. But once again, I've heard really, really good things about this. And if you are a fan of the Avatar: The Last Airbender and its spin-off series, this is probably worth taking a peek at. Next up is Blades in the Dark from John Harper, and it's available through Evil Hat Productions. Blades in the Dark is very popular. This was built on, to my knowledge, I'm not positive because I have not personally checked this out and reviewed it, but my understanding is it is built on the Apocalypse engine, so it's powered by the Apocalypse. But John Harper has created all these new twists to it that it's really become its own game, that it really stands apart from PBTA titles out there. In fact, it has inspired itself many other role-playing games which fall under the category of Forged in the Dark. So in Blades in the Dark, the player characters are part of a crew. They're a team. They're usually, as far as I understand, they're criminals plotting heists. And it's in a kind of dark fantasy setting. And everybody's out to get the player characters, and I have heard it is an absolute blast. Next up is another pretty recent release, and it is Bugbears and Borderlands from Izegrim Creations. And I shared a news piece about this, I think it was about a couple of weeks ago, because this looked really, really interesting, because its pitch line is, what if 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons had been designed by Tom Moldvay, who was the mastermind behind basic D&D back in the day. So essentially, it's kind of a stripped down 5e, but more of kind of like a learning experience without being too simple. So once again, this has come across as being very, very interesting, and it's, get ready for it, in PDF, it's $1. So after I did that news piece, I've had folks who watch my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, email me and then comment on later shows afterwards that they went and bought it right away because it's $1. So how can you go wrong there? Even if you just picked at it for some ideas for what other game you might be running, I'm sure it is well worth that 100 pennies. So next up, we also have Dungeon World, which has been out for quite some time. And this is built on Powered by the Apocalypse. It is on the Apocalypse engine. And it is, to my knowledge, one of the first of the Powered by the Apocalypse games that came out. And we do have a review of Dungeon World on thegaminggang.com. And if you're not familiar with Dungeon World, mechanically, it's pretty simple. The player characters will have playbooks. So whereas you normally would have a class and you've got different features to that class, maybe you've got different skills, things along those lines, similar, but you only have certain kinds of feats that you can perform. So mechanically, it's very, very easy to get into. And you're basically normally just rolling 2d6 and you're looking for 7 or higher to succeed. But as a game master, this might be a little trickier because there are degrees of success. So a 7 is a success, but. So we see there's like failure and, failure but, success but, success and. So success and is, wow, that's good, and something good also happens. So there's a lot of leeway with what those dice mean. So it makes it a little more complex for a game master, especially those who have pretty much, cut their teeth on D20, because this is a bit more unique. But one of the things this has going for it is really, really detailed on creating your world. And there's a lot of cooperative creation going on in Dungeon World. So your players have a lot of say in what goes on in their fantasy world as well. So pretty popular. A lot of people really, really dig Dungeon World. And if you're looking to completely get away from D20 mechanics, this is possibly one that you could take a peek at. Next up is Jackals, which is from Osprey Games. I have reviewed this. I had a physical copy of it, so it is a video review. I actually did a first look video as well as a video review. I knew this really wasn't going to get to my table, even though it's really cool. So I did find a good home for my copy of Jackals. And Jackals is kind of a swords and sorcery role-playing game. And it is sort of Middle Eastern and Persian, bit of Asian flavor to it. And it's Bronze Age. And very, very unique. It uses a D100 resolution mechanic. So if you're familiar with Call of Cthulhu or RuneQuest, which this is, I don't want to say it's similar to, but it's also, RuneQuest is Bronze Age. This is Bronze Age. This is far less detailed as far as the game setting than RuneQuest. I can certainly tell you that. But Osprey Games has started coming out in the past couple of years, well, maybe past 3 years, I guess we'll say, with a lot of role-playing games, and they're pretty good. They are pretty good. This is really the only fantasy role-playing game that they currently have that I would recommend. They have Romance of the Shattered Kingdom or something. I forget what it's called. It wasn't really good. It was kind of just a 5e knockoff, in my opinion. But Jackals is very, very solid. And unlike most of the Osprey Games role-playing games, there are additional supplemental materials out there for it. In fact, I've got a review of the latest coming soon. It is Travelers on the War Road. So next up, we've got Rolemaster, which we have a brand new edition that has just come out very, very recently. I think this is only available in PDF currently. This is from Iron Crown Enterprises. And I've got experience with Rolemaster from way back in the day when it came out, and it was originally Arms Law, Claw Law, Spell Law. And this is another role-playing game that I've had the publisher contact me asking me if I would do a review of it. And I unfortunately had to let them know that until it comes out in a physical book, I personally would not be able to review it. And the truth is, I don't review PDFs. Like I said, I find shooting videos with a PDF to be boring. But if I review PDFs, then I'll never get a chance to review anything else, because I would only be reviewing PDFs. So Rolemaster is crunchy. It's got a lot of dice rolling. But if you want very detailed combat and detailed critical hit tables and the differences between using a flail and a short sword and a mace and a morning star are important to you, then you definitely want to check out Rolemaster. Rolemaster, trimmed down, was actually the core game mechanics for the very, very well-remembered Middle-earth role-playing. There's a little trivia for you. Next up is a game that I personally don't know a whole lot about. But once again, I have heard good things. And it is Torchbearer, which has a new second edition, which it kickstarted. This second edition is available. This is kind of an OSR role-playing game. Mechanically, I'm not familiar with it. So I don't know if it's more of kind of a throwback to like basic, expert, or AD&D, or if it's its own thing. But I do understand that this has kind of an old school Renaissance vibe to it. So this is not your 5e D&D Pathfinder second edition. This is more kind of gritty. Player characters get killed easily. That is kind of a tenet of the OSR. But I've heard really good things about Burning Wheel, and they are the creators of Torchbearer. They also have Burning Wheel, or I should say The Burning Wheel, which is a fantasy role-playing game. I heard that is super, super crunchy rules-wise. I have never actually had an opportunity to take a peek at it. They also have Mouse Guard, which is based on the award-winning comics. I have not had an opportunity to check that out either. I would take a guess that that might use a trimmed down Burning Wheel system, seeing that I would think it was maybe aimed towards folks who are looking for a less crunchy approach to role-playing games. Then again, I might be wrong. Mouse Guard might be like absolutely just heavy, heavy rules. I don't know. But once again, Torchbearer, I've heard very, very good things. And from my knowledge that I ran across, can't tell you if this is going to be exactly true, but I think the 2 hardcovers come in a slipcase and it's $50. So, and I think they clock in at like 500 pages. So if that is true, that's a pretty smoking deal. All right, the last of the role-playing games that I do not have a physical copy to share with you is The Witcher from our Talsorian Games. And I have reviewed The Witcher. I will be very upfront. I did not give it a great review score because when I reviewed it, I think it was still not completely cooked, which is a term that I like to use. Yeah. Could have used a little more time in the oven. I think it needed a bit more development, which from my understanding, it has. So, and of course, if you are a fan of the books or the video games or the Netflix series, you will definitely want to get your hands on The Witcher, because that is one thing that it actually does very, very well, is it does incorporate that fictional world very nicely into the proceedings. All right, so those are 9 fantasy role-playing games that I do not personally own physical copies of, but either we have reviewed them or I have heard really, really good things about them. So now I'm going to share with you some physical books that I have reviewed and I can certainly recommend. And the first one is going to be controversial because of its creator. And, you know, I don't sit there and make sure to like vet people's personal politics before I review a role-playing game. I just don't. And I have reviewed plenty of role-playing games from people who politically I am probably exactly opposite of. And this is probably the case here, but I got to point out, this is actually a really, really good fantasy role-playing game system. And it is Adventure Conqueror King from Autarch. And there's a lot of content for this. So this is the core book, but there are a lot of releases, a lot of supplemental material here. It's kind of a sword and sorcery sort of setting. It is built on the open game license and get a lot of character customization. The one thing that most people gravitate towards Adventure Conqueror King for, outside of its sword and sorcery sort of setting, is its domain play. Because in fantasy role-playing games dating all the way back pretty much to the beginning, there's always supposed to be domain play. Oh, you're a fighter. Well, when you get to 9th level, you get a keep. And then there's never any rules for that, right? Oh, you're a wizard? Well, when you hit 9th level, you get a wizard's tower and you get these acolytes who follow you. And that's about it. That's all the rules. Well, domain play is built into this, and it's, I don't want to say complex, it's detailed. It certainly is detailed. Myself personally, if I were running a campaign with Adventure Conqueror King, I probably wouldn't use all that domain detail, but I know there are a lot of people out there who are just absolutely huge fans of the domain play from Adventure Conqueror King. And this, is, of course, is also available in PDF. So next up, I have one of my favorites out there, Basic Fantasy. So Basic Fantasy is written by Chris Gonnerman, if I remember correctly. I think that is his name. I guess I should have looked at the book before I started shooting the video, huh? Pretty sure that's the author. I know it's, yeah, I think I'm almost positive. It's Chris Gonnerman. Anyway, so Basic Fantasy is kind of an old school Renaissance with modern mechanics. So it's kind of D20 with old school mentality to it. So I'm going to tell you what the really big selling point for a lot of people happens to be with Basic Fantasy. Not only that it's really good, it's absolutely free, and it's open source. So if you happen to go to basicfantasy.org, you can download all the PDFs, and there's loads of adventures. There's loads of supplemental material. It is amazing how much is there, and it's completely, absolutely free. You can also pick up physical copies, like the hardcover, or there's also a soft cover at cost. So if you are going to play Basic Fantasy and you're feeling kind of generous, you can very easily pick up softcover books for everybody at your table. And if I remember correctly, at least when I picked up Basic Fantasy, because I've got the hardcover, I also have the softcover. I think the softcover through Amazon was like $5. So a smoking deal. And if you're looking to port over old adventures from like Basic, Expert, AD&D, what is it, BXCEI, forget. You easily can. It's you can easily take those classic D&D adventures and Judges Guild and port them over. Next up, this is reviewed pretty recently, and I really enjoy this. Best Left Buried Deeper. It's Best Left Buried, but this edition here is Best Left Buried Deeper from SoulMuppetPublishing. And the reason why the name is different is because all three of the core books are included in this one volume. Now, I do want to point out, I mentioned the three core books, but really, you only need the one book, the first book, to run Best Left Buried Deeper. So this is also kind of an OSR-flavored fantasy role-playing game. Pretty rules light. And one of the things I really like about this is the player characters are crypt diggers. They're not really digging crypts, but they're explorers who are part of a company. And they actually go in search of tombs and dungeons and abandoned ruins and things like that, searching for treasure. So this is kind of a gritty, lethal combat sort of fantasy role-playing game. But one of the cool things is they're part of a company, so they have a place to go to when they need to take a break from dungeon delving. So they've got a location that they can sell their loot, or they can resupply. It's a great source for replacement player characters when some of them take a dirt nap after a particularly lethal combat. Really fun. Really enjoyed checking this out. So I highly recommend Best Left Buried. Or if you want to get this volume here, it is Best Left Buried Deeper. Now, another fantasy role-playing game that has actually been out for quite a while, that just this past year I had an opportunity to check out, and I was very, very impressed. Castles and Crusades from Troll Lord Games. Now, yes, I am sharing the Monsters and Treasure book, not showing you the player's book. One of the things that's very cool about this latest print run is all these covers have an homage to the AD&D equivalents. So, as you can see, this is an homage to the Monster Manual. This is one of my favorite covers. I think this cover is so cool. But who cares about a cover? You're looking to play a game. Castles and Crusades is easy to wrap your head around. Tons of customization for the player character. And I know some people are thrown off by the primary and secondary attributes. So it's D20, for action resolution, and you have a DC, essentially. And, of course, you're looking to meet or exceed that challenge number, I guess I'll say. I forget the exact terminology inside, but you know what I'm talking about. You need to roll this or higher on a D20 plus whatever modifiers or penalties you've got. So one of the things that throws people off a little bit is your challenge number, if it's a primary attribute, is 12. But if it's secondary attribute, it's an 18. And for some reason, some folks find that a little confusing. I think it's cool. I mean, there's ways you can kind of house rule it. I'm not going to get into it if you want to make things a little easier for yourself. But I think it's very cool because you can customize your player character a little more, right? So you might want to have a fighter with a primary intelligence because not only are they a fighter, but they're an investigator. You know, they just happen to be pretty good with a weapon. You get a lot of variation that you can pull off with your customization. There's loads of content out there for Tunnels and Trolls. In fact, the best way to describe this is that, from what I understand, Gary Gygax himself said if there had been a third edition of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Castles and Crusades would have been it. Sweet. I really like this. I like Castles and Crusades. I've reviewed all of the core books. I actually have a couple of other books that I have not, unfortunately, had an opportunity to really dig into. They're more supplemental to provide reviews for, but they are on the horizon. Next up is something quite a bit different, and this is another role-playing game that has been around for quite some time, but it's got a very, very rabid community around it, and that is Castle Falkenstein from our Talsorian Games. And this is unique. This is a fantasy role-playing game, but it is not in your traditional, medieval period. Now, this is more along the lines of the Victorian age, but it is not really steampunk. And the action resolution is very, very unique. It is not your typical just rolling a D20 or 2D6 or anything like that. There is quite a good amount of supplemental material that is out there as well for Castle Falkenstein. And I should also mention the fine folks over at our Talsorian Games are good people. So everything I'm sharing with you, I can personally attest that the folks behind the scenes at each of these companies are good folks. Because there are some role-playing games that I'm sure folks out there, once they watch this video, they're going to think, wow, I'm really surprised that Jeff didn't mention XYZ. Now, just because I didn't mention it doesn't mean that I dislike the company. It might just mean that I completely zoned and forgot about it. But there are a couple of companies that I do not cover on the Gaming Gang. They don't like me, and I return the dislike. But I certainly like Dungeon Crawl Classics from Goodman Games. Yes, this is another open game license game. But there's just something about Dungeon Crawl Classics that is completely unique when it comes to, and this really isn't a retro clone. This also really isn't an OSR game. And I know a lot of people feel that, oh yeah, Dungeon Crawl Classics, yeah, that's old school Renaissance. Its mindset is. Mechanically, it really isn't. But this is another fantasy role-playing game. It's got some very unique mechanics to it. I love the luck that's involved. I love how halflings are like luck batteries. So luck gives you, positive modifiers for your dice, and you spend luck, right? And for most characters, that luck, once they spend it, it's gone forever. You know, your luck ran out. Thieves and halflings don't. They regain luck, and especially halflings. The adventures for Dungeon Crawl Classics are a blast. This is where the funnel adventures began, where the players might have 4 or 5 0-level characters that they control that go through an adventure, and essentially whoever survives happens to be their player characters. Lots of fun. The magic system is one of my favorite magic systems out there as far as really giving you the feel of sword and sorcery magic. It's not fancy in magic, and magic is wild. It's very difficult to control, and it corrupts. Definitely recommend Dungeon Crawl Classics from Goodman Games. This is also a role-playing game it's not super difficult to port over old D&D adventures for either. Next up, this was one of my games of the year, one of my favorites. I don't do best of videos. I do favorites because everybody's opinion is a little bit different. Everybody's needs and what they look for in a game is different. But I really dug Forbidden Lands from our friends over at Free League Publishing. And this is also kind of an OSR vibed game, but it utilizes the Year One engine from Free League Publishing, which powers many of their role-playing games. It's not completely the same mechanic all the time with all of their games, but usually they're fairly similar. And this is a very unique setting as well. And one of the cool things about this box set, the books inside, you know what, I'll just open it up and show you one. Because usually a box set, the books are soft cover books. No, not there's 2. And they are really nice hardcover books. And the only unfortunate thing about Forbidden Lands, and there is content out there for it. There are, I think, 2 or 3 adventure supplements. There's another supplementary addition to the line as well. I got to be honest, I'm not sure how much Free League Publishing is still supporting it, because they recently had a very successful Kickstarter to bring an English edition of Dragonbane to the public, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce its Swedish name, but it's a very popular Swedish role-playing game. And I honestly think that might be the fantasy role-playing game that Free League Publishing is going to invest their efforts in from here on out. Speaking of games that might not have an active life going on right now, I would have included Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of from Modiphius Entertainment, but Modiphius is losing the license to Conan. So I don't know how long you've got to still pick up the Conan adventures in that, because Modiphius Entertainment has done a phenomenal job with Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of. So if you are a fan of Robert E. Howard's, it is a no-brainer to pick it up. And it does utilize what's known as the 2D20 system, which is kind of Modiphius Entertainment's home system itself, too. But like I said, it would have made the list. I just don't know how long it's going to be available still. And it should be pretty soon where they're going to be like, oh, we got to get rid of this because we don't have the license anymore. All right, moving right along. This is another recent release for a new edition. It was actually the 3rd edition of Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, which is now just shortened to Hyperborea. And if you are interested in a retro clone, a role-playing game that is built on classic Dungeons and Dragons and really captures the swords and sorcery vibe, very, very nice. The one drawback that I see is it does use a Vancian magic system, which doesn't feel swords and sorcery to me. That's just me personally. But this is a really, really cool role-playing game. The character classes, you've got all these very unique archetypes and like subclasses. Very, very cool. The creator is really, really responsive and a lot of fun. So if you are looking for a retro clone that really tackles the sword and sorcery vibe, especially if you're a fan of, as weird as this might sound, Thundar the Barbarian from back in the day, this is kind of right along those lines, because it's a fantasy world, but there's this ancient technology. So nice. That's why you've got like the barbarian and like there's a spaceship here. So this is Hyperborea. This is from Northwind Adventures. Once again, let me remind you that even though I'm showing you physical books, to my knowledge, all of these are available in PDF, and a great many of them are available at Drive-Thru RPG. So I should mention that the Gaming Gang is affiliated with the One Bookshelf sites. So if you are going to say, pop on over to Drive-Thru RPG to pick up any of these in PDF, please stop by thegaminggang.com first. Click on one of our banner ads. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a small portion of that sale. And all those nickels, dimes, and quarters really do add up and help keep thegaminggang.com around, because I do not do Patreon. I do not do annual Kickstarters. Really, the drive-through is kind of what keeps us around. So, moving right along. Index card role-playing game from Runehammer. And this edition, this is the Master Edition. This is actually through Modiphius Entertainment, which I was just talking about. Conan in an age, Adventures in an Age Undreamed of. Yeah, that title just doesn't roll off the tongue. Although it's an excellent system, really great source books, title just doesn't roll off the tongue. Index card role-playing, that's a lot easier. Even better when I say ICRPG. So this is not only fantasy. In fact, in this hardcover, there are 5 different settings. And in one word, to sum up ICRPG, fun. This is loads of fun. This is a role-playing game that if you're trying to introduce the hobby to some friends who've never played, or maybe you've never really game mastered before, maybe you just like watching videos about role-playing games and dreaming of getting an opportunity to play them or game master them, this is perfect. This really is a perfect introduction, and lots of action, quick moving, very, I don't want to say it's super rules light. I mean, it's fairly rules light, but mechanically super easy to wrap your head around. So once you learn a few different rules, you're all good to go. You've pretty much got everything covered. So really like this a lot. And there is supplemental material out there for it. And the creator, definitely you want to check them out. Hankering for an Ale. Is their pen name? They're really, really active. In fact, last I saw it, but it's been a while, they're pretty active with YouTube videos as well. So this is Index Card Role-Playing Game from Runehammer and Modiphius Entertainment. So somebody had asked in the comment section for that open game license video, did I think Old School Essentials was safe from this open game license 1.1? And the reality is, I don't know. As I stated in that video, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know these things. I'm hoping it's okay because it's excellent. If you are in the market for experiencing fantasy role-playing as it was back when Basic and Expert were out, when that was cutting-edge fantasy role-playing game, plus Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, because they were separate for a reason. They weren't separate just because they was like, well, you know, we want to have this easier Dungeons and Dragons for you to experience and cut your teeth with before you move on to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. No, it was basic Dungeons and Dragons for Dave Arneson's royalties. Yeah, some people don't know that. But BX, super easy to get into. Everything is just presented so nicely. It's so easy to understand. It's no changes to Basic Expert, but it's cleaned up a bunch. And I should point out, there's the option for Ascending Armor class if you would like. Everything's in this book. Everything you need is located in this hardcover. And I should also mention there's the Advanced Fantasy, which is 2 volumes. If you want to experience a lot of the options from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but built on a BX engine, because there are differences, then you can pick those up as well. So if you're just looking for the classic experience, you only need this volume. And if you're looking for the kind of like AD&D version of Old School Essentials, then it's 2 volumes for Advanced Fantasy. So let's say you want to experience Advanced Dungeons and Dragons like it was back in the day, maybe without the high Gygaxian language, maybe with a little easier to understand kind of presentation. Not that AD&D is difficult to understand, but if you've read through the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books, you know where I'm coming from. Well, if you'd like to experience those days without that rule hassle, then you definitely got to take a look at OSRIC. So OSRIC is the AD&D rules cleaned up. Nothing's really been changed. Just presentation and understandability, I guess we'll say. But it's all in one volume. So you've got your player's guide, DM's guide, monster manual, all in one book. And I should also mention, it is exceptionally inexpensive. So this is another one of these role-playing games where, if I remember correctly, I got this on Lulu. And it was kind of at cost. I don't think I spent more than $10 on this. I might be wrong, because, you know, as you can see, there's a lot of role-playing games that I've tackled, and these are certainly not all of them. But really, really cool. If I remember off the top of my head, Matt Finch, who does Swords and Wizardry, which is another retro clone. I didn't want to bring out a ton of retro clones in this video. That's another that you can consider taking a look at if you're looking for like a basic expert kind of experience. Actually, even original D&D, might consider that. But really, really nice. And I got to point out, I mean, I had gotten some stuff from Lulu before, and I was like, They were soft covers. This hardcover is actually very nice. And OSRIC itself, highly recommended. Like I said, if you are looking for that AD&D experience without stumbling over the contents of the book, trying to figure out what the hell does he mean by that? All right, so let's jump ahead a few decades because you probably already know I'm pretty tight with this company if you happen to follow thegaminggang.com or if you watch videos here on the channel. And I always tell people that if you're looking for something other than 5e D&D, especially if you're looking for maybe a bit more, I almost said bombastic, but maybe a bit more exciting of a setting, far more character creation options. Wow, the options are practically limitless, as well as very unique 3-action economy in combat. Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I am actually starting to put things together to run a campaign on Foundry, the virtual tabletop, using Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And I just rolled out last month the first episode of a new series here on the Gaming Gang channel, and it is the Paizo Preview, which every month I am going to share a video of all the physical releases that come out from Paizo. Normally, I do standalone videos. Usually I do first looks on the Gaming Gang Dispatch, my live stream, and like the flip mats and stuff like that, I usually don't do video for. So I decided I was going to just have video for all the goodies that come out for both Pathfinder and Starfinder in the Paizo Preview, which will come out a couple of days after I receive those for the month, because the fine folks over at Paizo Inc. send me tons of stuff. Another great selling point of Pathfinder is there's always new content every month. So if you find yourself being frustrated because you have to sit waiting months for Dungeons and Dragons to release their next adventure book, and then you're like, oh, for crying out loud, I waited months for this? You won't find that disappointment, I don't believe, with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, one of the things that have scared people off from Pathfinder 2nd Edition is some folks call this Mathfinder, that there's all these calculations, and it might have been the case in 1st edition, but not so much in 2nd edition. Yes, there is math, and yes, Pathfinder 2nd edition, in my opinion, is more complex than 5e D&D, but not a ton. And personally, if you are looking for an alternative to Dungeons and Dragons, but you still want that high fantasy, Pathfinder 2nd edition, absolutely no doubt about it. Moving right along. Maybe you're looking for some Arthurian adventuring, right? In Britain. Well, this is the quick start rules. This is Pendragon, which is from Chaosium Inc. And the reason why I'm sharing this quick start here is it's actually the only physical product I have for Pendragon. And Pendragon's receiving a new edition this coming year. From what I understand, we're supposed to be seeing a new edition of Pendragon in 2023. So that should be exciting. So if you know much about role-playing games, you know one of the great, I should say late great designers that was out there was Greg Stafford, who majority of his designs were for Chaosium, including RuneQuest, which we're going to get to in a moment. And Pendragon, he felt, was his greatest achievement. And it is a very unique fantasy role-playing game. It does use, it's considered basic role-playing, which is kind of what powers just about all of the Chaosium role-playing games. But rather than percentile dice, you're rolling D20. So I misspoke when I shared a video about Runequest, which I'll talk about in a sec. And I said, well, it's really not part of the basic role-playing. I guess they do consider it to be, seeing, even though it's not percentile, it is a D20, so a 1 is 5%, right? One of the coolest things about Pendragon, and I'm sure we will see this for the new edition, is there is the Pendragon campaign. It's phenomenal. If you want to play the story of King Arthur as a knight, you're not King Arthur. You're not, Lancelot, Galahad, Gawain. But if you want to be part of that, it is amazing. It is fantastic. So keep your eyes peeled for the new edition of Pendragon. And in the meantime, you can download the Quick Start PDF absolutely free and check it out. So I wanted to share that. I was just talking about Runequest. It's on this list. In fact, another new show that I've rolled out is my Why You Should Play. And the first episode, which I just aired last week, was Runequest. And I talked about why this is just a phenomenal fantasy role-playing game. It's not everyone's cup of tea. It isn't. Some of the rules are far crunchier than people want. It is percentile system, which if you're only coming from Dungeons and Dragons and that's all you've ever played, this is going to be a bit different for you. But if you are looking for a fully fleshed out fantasy setting, now this is Bronze Age, so it is a bit swords and sandals. It is also very influenced by mythology, and I don't mean our own mythology, but its own game world's mythology. And another aspect that's very cool about this is everybody has access to magic. It's not just just magic users. English, Jeff, use it. It's not just magic users. Everybody has access to some sort of magic. But of course, you do have characters who focus on magic and they have much more powerful magic available to them. But this is wonderful. And this starter set I'm holding right here is phenomenal. This is how role-playing game starter sets should be for every company. And a lot of the games we've taken a look at have starter sets. And some that we're going to take a look at have starter sets. And every single one of them that does is really, really well done. All right, so Runequest, Pendragon, 2 Greg Stafford designed role-playing games that are just absolutely exciting and a lot of fun as well. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, that's not going to be, that typical kind of medieval European fantasy, then by all means, check out Sybaroum, which I believe that is how it's pronounced. That's how I always pronounce it. From Free League Publishing. There is a lot of content out there for this. They also have Ruins of Sybaroum, which is for 5e. So if you're still looking for that 5e mechanic without maybe necessarily supporting Wizards of the Coast at this point in time, just getting away from D&D, but you still like the familiarity of those mechanics, there's also Ruins of Sybaroum, which is out as well, which ports over Sybaroum to 5e. Sybaroum is a very unique fantasy setting. It's a bit dark, and like elves are not necessarily good folk, right? They're not your typical, fantasy elves. You don't have your typical fantasy dwarves. This is not a grimdark setting, though, I do want to point out. So essentially, this is a world that was almost destroyed by a great evil, but it survived. And that's where you're kind of picking up the pieces in Sybaroum. Fantastic artwork, really, really well done. You certainly cannot go wrong if you're looking for a very different, very unique, but still kind of familiar fantasy role-playing game setting. Also from Free League Publishing comes The One Ring. This is second edition. This is the new edition of The One Ring. And if you have any interest whatsoever in role-playing in Tolkien's world, then this should be part of your collection. Mechanically, pretty simple to wrap your head around. This also uses that year one engine that's pretty much powering many of the Free League Publishing role-playing games. So it is not super crunchy rules-wise, very easy to get your head around, and very, very faithful to the world of Middle-earth. And there's a good amount of content. This is the second edition. First edition was with my friends over at Cubicle 7 Entertainment. They did a phenomenal job, and I'm looking forward to more of the same from Free League Publishing with this second edition. So we're going to turn back the clock again and talk about one of the oldest fantasy role-playing games. In fact, the creator termed the phrase role-playing game. Yes, that was Rick Loomis, and I am talking about Tunnels and Trolls. So this is another very unique fantasy role-playing game. It's got a very unique fantasy world. The combat mechanics are very different, where your players are all working together, which, of course, obviously, the player characters are always working together in combat. Well, okay, 99.9% of the time. But the approach to it is very different, where each of the player characters are actually adding a modifier to the combat itself. Where this might fall off a little bit is high-level play. I'm not sure. I have heard different opinions on high-level play, but the reality is, how often do you really get into high-level play with your fantasy role-playing games? I know a great many people, they prefer to get to about level 10 if you're looking at, say, a scale of 1 to 20. And by then, they're like, you know what? Let's start new characters. So, happens all the time. This is another fun role-playing game. This role-playing game is actually very, very popular in Japan. Imagine that. So is Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu. Can't believe I can't say Cthulhu. All right. So as I mentioned, I do these all in one take. I need to wet my whistle. I'm almost done. We're almost ready to wrap this up. But as you can see, there are a lot of role-playing games out there that you can have a great time with. They aren't called Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, Tunnels and Trolls. Check out my review. This is a lot of fun. I don't know what's going on with its publisher, Flying Buffalo Games. When I first reviewed this, in the review a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, maybe, Rick Loomis had passed away, and he was essentially the person who was running Flying Buffalo Games. But I had corresponded with somebody with the company, and they said, oh, yeah, you know, we've got new stuff coming out and all these other things, and then I haven't heard anything. So there was a commenter on my OGL 1.1 video who said, oh, you know, too bad the public can't get together and, you know, purchase the rights to one of the old classic role-playing games and just make it completely open source. And they mentioned Tunnels and Trolls. And I said, well, Flying Buffalo is still around, though. So you can't really just take over that IP. But once again, I don't know what's going on. I would love to see more things coming out. Now, there's plenty of content out there for Tunnels and Trolls in PDF on DriveThruRPG. Tunnels and Trolls is also really well known for their solo adventures. And they've been known for solo adventures for decades. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So we are in the home stretch. There are 3 fantasy role-playing games for me to talk about that are left. And the first one is one that's a big favorite of mine. I love this role-playing game. I love the attitude it has. And the fine folks over at Cubicle 7, I can honestly call friends in the industry. They are all good people. And yes, I'm talking about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, 4th edition. I just really like this system. It is a percentile system. It is not like a basic role-playing system, though. It's got very unique combat, very unique magic, and the game world itself is just a standout. Now, some people out there think, well, you know what? I don't play the, Warhammer miniatures games. I don't really know anything about it. You don't need to. Everything's right here. This is the old world, which isn't, it's not being supported now by Games Workshop as far as like a miniatures line, as far as I know. Because I think they do, now it's Age of Sigmar. I could be absolutely wrong. But I think Games Workshop doesn't have an old world miniatures game setting currently. I'm sure they will in the future again. But this is really, really unique. And one of the most famous role-playing game campaigns is for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and that is The Enemy Within, which Cubicle 7 Entertainment has released a director's cut of, which has been completely revamped by Graham Davis, and it is fantastic. Really, really good. I've reviewed the first 4 parts of it, as well as the companions, and my review for the conclusion, Empire in Ruins, is on the near horizon as well. This is a lot of fun. This has a sense of humor to it. It's kind of a dark sense of humor, but I also love the fact that the player characters are kind of regular folk, especially to start off. And they're normally just kind of thrown into the proceedings. So highly, highly recommend Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition from Cubicle 7 Entertainment. So there's another Cubicle 7 Entertainment role-playing game that I can highly recommend. And I can certainly tell you that Sammy Uhas, one of my reviewers over at thegaminggang.com, right? I guess I should say one of the reviewers at thegaminggang.com. She's not my reviewer. She's one of our reviewers. She's part of the gang. When I first asked her to review this role-playing game, I kind of got the answer that I just gave you about the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I don't know anything about, that, and I don't know. I said, well, give it a shot. Tell me what you think. Now, I'll be the first to point out, I have not reviewed this. Sammy reviewed this. It is Warhammer Fantasy Age of Sigmar, Soulbound, and she thought this was phenomenal. She was so pleasantly surprised at how good this is, and she does all the reviews for the Soulbound releases that come our way. And I always shoot a first look video so you can see what the book looks like, and then Sammy does the reviews of the PDFs. And this is an epic fantasy setting, and your player characters are seriously epic heroes, even from the beginning. And that's what really sets this apart from other fantasy role-playing games is your player characters are already famous. I don't want to say legendary, but they are very powerful. And of course, they grow in power as you continue. One of the great things about the role-playing games, any of the role-playing games from Cubicle 7 Entertainment, not only the fantasy role-playing games, or the ones based on a Warhammer property, there's always content. These are really, really well supported, and there's always PDF adventures. They float out free adventures quite often, so there's always plenty of gaming goodness for any of the Cubicle 7 Entertainment role-playing games. So it's not like you have to sit there and wait like a yearly release. Nothing like that. Now, that doesn't mean everything comes out physically, especially with the adventures. A lot of the adventures just come out in PDF, and they're downloadable as an individual adventure. All right, I have one final fantasy role-playing game to make a recommendation for you, and it is White Box Edition. It is fantastic medieval adventure game. It's just white box. And the claim to fame for this little book is I actually was reading this when I was sitting in the hospital waiting, undergoing triple bypass surgery. So thankfully I had some RPG books that I needed to review to keep me occupied. And if you have any interest in original Dungeons and Dragons, right? Those little booklets. So they're known as white box, although when they first came out, it was a wood box, then a brown box. But most people refer to it as white box and the little brown books. This captures this really, really well. Cleans it up, better presentation, tweaks some of the rules, but all in all, it's pretty solid retro clone of old original Dungeons and Dragons, and very, very nicely presented, very well written, and very, very inexpensive as well. In fact, I picked up this on Amazon, and if I remember correctly, and this is like the special cover, because when I reviewed it, people were commenting, wait a second, how did you get that cover? I've got a different cover. I like that cover. And this was like $6, if I remember correctly. It is white box from Seattle Hill Games. So definitely check that out. Once again, this is available on Amazon. And of course, it is in PDF over at Drive-Thru RPG as well. So there you have it. 29 fantasy role-playing games. See, I beat that 20. Said in the video, I could give you 20. Well, I gave you 29 fantasy role-playing games that I can guarantee that you can take to the game table, play, and you will have an absolute blast. And that one of those 29 is named Dungeons and Dragons. All right. That is it for this time out. Hopefully you hung out for the entire video. I don't know. I'm sure you probably tuned out or fell asleep. But maybe you went and popped some popcorn, got yourself a cool drink. Hopefully you're still hanging out for the end. Anyway, thank you very much for taking time out to check out this video. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this one, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Central, right here on YouTube. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. Come on, you know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you kindly for taking time out of your busy life to watch this video. Until I see you next time, here's hoping each and every one of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.
Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.